The Krezeth throne room was as imposing as the species it belonged to. Towering obsidian pillars lined the chamber, glinting in the bioluminescent light of massive, pulsating orbs embedded in the walls. At the far end of the room, seated on a throne carved from volcanic rock, was King Zorthakaray, his scaled form radiating authority. His crimson eyes bore into Commander Elias Kane, the human warrior who had been chosen to negotiate the fragile ceasefire between Earth and the Krezeth Empire. The room was silent save for the low hum of alien machinery. Elias, clad in the utilitarian gray of the human coalition military, stood with his hands behind his back, his expression unreadable. He was not a diplomat by trade but a soldier, and his presence here was a testament to his ability to earn respect, even from his enemies. Commander Kane, Zorthakaray said, his voice a gravelly rumble. Our negotiations are at an end. As a gesture of goodwill, I offer you a token of our commitment to peace. Elias arched an eyebrow. A token? The king gestured, and from the shadows emerged a figure who moved with an aura of barely restrained defiance. Princess Thalvera. Her obsidian scales shimmered in the dim light, her angular face framed by jagged ridges that gave her an air of regal menace. Crimson eyes, identical to her father's, burned with something sharper than anger, contempt, perhaps, or amusement. She was tall, towering over Elias, though her stature did nothing to intimidate him. If anything, her glare only sharpened his curiosity. "This is my daughter," Zorthakaray said, his tone suggesting that the matter was already settled. "She will accompany you to your world. Let her presence among your people signify the strength of this treaty." Elias's first instinct was to refuse. The implications of accepting such a gift were staggering. A Krezeth princess living among humans? It was an invitation for political chaos. But as his gaze flicked to Thalvera, he saw something in her expression that intrigued him, a flash of rebellion, a spark of individuality that set her apart from the stoic warriors flanking the throne. Thalvera crossed her arms and smirked. "Let's get one thing straight, human. I'm not doing this for you, and I certainly didn't agree to it." Elias matched her smirk with a slight tilt of his head. "Believe me, princess, the feeling's mutual." The journey to Earth aboard the human starship Aegis was tense, to say the least. Thalvera prowled the ship's corridors like a caged predator, her sharp wit and sharper tongue alienating most of the crew. Her disdain for human technology was apparent, as she openly criticized everything from the ship's design to its weapon systems. "Your reliance on such primitive constructs is astonishing," she remarked during one of their many verbal sparring sessions. Elias, seated in the command chair, didn't look up from the datapad he was reviewing. "And yet, those primitive constructs held their own against your empire." She narrowed her eyes but said nothing. Despite her biting remarks, Elias couldn't help but notice that she was observant, almost obsessively so. She studied the ship's systems, its crew, even its routines. It was as if she were cataloging every detail for some future purpose. When they arrived at the Human Coalition's headquarters, the reaction to Thalvera's presence was immediate and polarized. Diplomats whispered furiously behind closed doors, soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, and scientists clamored for the chance to study her. Thalvera, for her part, seemed to thrive on the attention, though her scathing critiques of human arrogance did little to endear her to anyone. Elias assigned her quarters near his own, ostensibly to keep an eye on her. In truth, he was beginning to find her a puzzle worth solving. Beneath her scorn and bravado lay a mind as sharp as any blade, and Elias suspected that her rebellious streak wasn't born of mere petulance. It didn't take long for Thalvera to stir up trouble. She attended strategy meetings uninvited, offering unsolicited, and often biting, commentary on human military tactics. Yet, frustratingly, her observations were often correct. During a session to review planetary defense protocols, she pointed out a glaring vulnerability in their orbital detection systems that had gone unnoticed. "You're leaving yourselves exposed," she said, tracing a clawed finger over the holographic display. "A competent enemy could exploit this in hours." Her tone was dismissive, but her insights couldn't be ignored. Elias grudgingly acknowledged her contributions, though he was quick to remind her that respect was earned, not demanded. Outside the command center, Thalvera's presence among the rank-and-file soldiers was a source of friction. Many viewed her as a symbol of alien oppression, a reminder of the bloody conflict that had nearly destroyed them. But not all shared this sentiment. Lieutenant Mira Solis, a young officer with a knack for diplomacy, took it upon herself to bridge the gap. "You're not what I expected," Mira said during a sparring session in the training room. Thalvera, who had easily disarmed Mira moments earlier, tilted her head. "And what did you expect?" "Someone colder," Mira admitted. "You've got fire." Thalvera's lips curved into a rare, genuine smile. "You fight with heart, human. That's rare among my people." Their tentative camaraderie did little to quell the unrest brewing on both sides of the treaty. Among the Krezeth, dissenters decried Thalvera's exile as an unforgivable betrayal. On Earth, opposition to her presence reached a fever pitch, with protests erupting in major cities. Elias found himself caught between warring factions, both external and internal. The breaking point came when a rogue Krezeth faction attacked a remote human colony, hoping to undermine the treaty and incite war. Thalvera insisted on joining the mission to defend the colony, a decision that led to a heated argument with Elias. "You're not a soldier," he said, his voice taut with frustration. "I'm more than capable," she shot back. "And this is my fight as much as yours." Despite his misgivings, Elias allowed her to accompany the strike team. The battle was brutal, a chaotic clash of human and Krezeth forces against the rogue faction. Thalvera's combat skills were as formidable as her intellect, and her strategic insights helped turn the tide in their favor. After the dust settled, Elias watched from a distance as Thalvera knelt beside a frightened human child, her usually fierce expression softened. It was a side of her he hadn't seen before, a glimpse of the person beneath the warrior. In that moment, Elias realized how much she had grown, and how much she had changed him. News of Thalvera's heroics spread quickly, earning her a mix of admiration and condemnation. Among the Krezeth, she became a polarizing figure, hailed as a hero by some and a traitor by others. On Earth, her actions fueled both hope and fear, deepening the divide between those who sought unity and those who distrusted the alien presence. King Zorthakaray summoned her back to the Krezeth Empire, demanding an explanation. Elias insisted on accompanying her, knowing the danger she faced. Their return to the imperial court was fraught with tension. Zorthakaray's anger was palpable, but even he couldn't ignore the growing support for his daughter among their people. Standing before her father, Thalvera spoke with a confidence that silenced the chamber. "I am not your pawn," she declared. "I am not his gift. I am my own being, and I choose to fight for peace." Elias stepped forward, his presence a silent but powerful endorsement. The court erupted into chaos, but Zorthakaray, ever the strategist, seized the moment to announce a new era of cooperation, using Thalvera's actions as justification. Months later, aboard the Aegis, Thalvera and Elias stood side by side, watching as human and Krezeth engineers worked together on a new starship, a symbol of their fragile alliance. "Do you think it'll last?" she asked, her tone uncharacteristically uncertain. Elias shrugged. "Probably not. But it's a start." She smirked, her crimson eyes glinting with amusement. "You humans and your optimism." He chuckled. "You're one to talk." For the first time, they faced the future not as adversaries or reluctant allies, but as equals, and perhaps something more. The months that followed saw humanity and the Krezeth Empire navigating a precarious dance of cooperation. The starship under construction, a joint effort between the two civilizations, became a focal point for their fragile peace. It was designed to symbolize unity, a vessel that would carry both Krezeth and human crews on shared missions. Yet beneath the surface, tension simmered. Thalvera's presence on the project became a point of contention. Some Krezeth viewed her involvement as a betrayal, while certain human factions saw it as proof that their alliance was dangerously one-sided. Despite this, she threw herself into the work, offering her expertise on Krezeth technology and tactics. Elias, ever the soldier, became her unofficial partner in this endeavor. They spent long hours together on the orbital station overseeing the ship's construction, poring over schematics, mediating disputes between human and Krezeth engineers, and fending off political interference from both sides. The more time they spent together, the more their bond deepened. One evening, as they stood in the observation dome overlooking the starship's skeletal frame, Thalvera broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder if this is worth it?" she asked, her crimson eyes fixed on the vessel below. Elias leaned against the railing, his arms crossed. "Every day. But the alternative is going back to war. And I've seen enough of that to last a lifetime." Thalvera turned to him, her expression softer than he was used to. "You humans are stubborn. I used to think it was your greatest flaw. Now, I'm not so sure." Elias smiled faintly. "And you Krezeth are too proud for your own good. But I'm starting to see why." For a moment, the weight of their responsibilities lifted, replaced by a quiet understanding. Yet the world outside their shared space was far from quiet. The rogue Krezeth faction, still active despite their defeat, continued to undermine the alliance. Their attacks grew bolder, targeting supply routes and diplomatic envoys. On Earth, protests against the treaty escalated into violent clashes, with extremist groups calling for the dismantling of the alliance and the expulsion of all Krezeth from human space. The growing unrest reached a boiling point when a human outpost on the fringe of coalition space was destroyed in a suspected Krezeth attack. Though evidence pointed to rogue elements, many humans saw it as proof that the Empire couldn't be trusted. The coalition demanded answers, and Zorthak Array found himself under intense pressure to take action against the dissenters within his ranks. Amid this chaos, Thalvera and Elias were summoned to Earth for an emergency council meeting. The journey aboard the Aegis was tense, both of them acutely aware that the Alliance was on the brink of collapse. The council chamber on Earth was a stark contrast to the Krezeth throne room. Bright, sterile, and filled with rows of human representatives, it lacked the grandeur of Zorthak Array's court, but was no less intimidating. Elias and Thalvera stood before the council, their presence a visual representation of the Alliance. The accusations flew fast and furious. Human leaders questioned the Krezeth's commitment to peace, while Krezeth envoys bristled at the implied dishonor. Thalvera listened in silence, her gaze steady, until one particularly vocal human delegate accused her of being a spy. "Enough," she snapped, her voice cutting through the din like a blade. "I am no one's pawn, not my father's, not yours. If you wish to see this alliance fail, then continue your petty squabbling. But know this. The moment you turn on each other, you invite chaos that neither of our peoples can afford." The chamber fell silent. Even Elias, who had grown used to her fiery outbursts, was momentarily taken aback. He stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Thalvera is right," he said. "We don't have the luxury of mistrust. The rogue factions want us to tear each other apart. If we let them succeed, we've already lost." Their combined presence, human and Krezeth standing side by side, carried more weight than words alone. Though the council remained divided, it was enough to stave off immediate action. For now. In the aftermath of the meeting, Elias and Thalvera found themselves walking through the corridors of the coalition headquarters. The tension of the day hung between them, but there was also a sense of shared triumph. "You were impressive back there," Elias said. Thalvera smirked. "I'm used to dealing with stubborn fools. You humans are just louder about it." He chuckled. "Fair enough. But you handled it well. I think you might have actually scared a few of them." Her smirk softened into a small, genuine smile. "It's easier to scare them than to make them listen." Elias stopped, turning to face her. "You've done more than that. You've earned their respect, even if they won't admit it." Thalvera met his gaze, her crimson eyes searching his. For a moment, the weight of their roles faded, leaving only the two of them. "I didn't expect this," she admitted, her voice quiet. "Any of it. This alliance. It's not what I imagined when my father sent me away." "Neither did I," Elias said. "But sometimes the unexpected turns out to be exactly what we need." As the alliance teetered on the edge, Elias and Thalvera knew their fight was far from over. The rogue factions were still a threat, the council still divided, and the starship still incomplete. Yet in the midst of uncertainty, they had found something that neither of them had anticipated: trust. Together, they would face whatever came next, not as enemies or reluctant allies, but as partners determined to carve a path forward in a galaxy that seemed intent on tearing itself apart. The days following the tense council meeting were no less chaotic. Elias and Thalvera returned to the orbital station overseeing the construction of the joint starship, their shared focus narrowing to the work that symbolized everything they fought for. Yet, even amidst the chaos, an unspoken shift had begun to take root between them, something neither was entirely ready to acknowledge, but neither could deny. One evening, long after most of the station's crew had retired, Elias found himself in the observation dome. The skeletal framework of the ship floated outside, illuminated by the cold light of distant stars. He had come here often since the project began, seeking solace in the quiet and the endless void beyond. Tonight, however, he was not alone. Thalvera stood by the railing, her silhouette sharp against the glow of the observation windows. She didn't turn when he entered, but spoke as if she'd been expecting him. "Do you ever feel small?" she asked, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. Elias walked to the railing and stood beside her, his gaze following hers to the half-finished ship. "Sometimes. But I think that's a good thing. Keeps me grounded." She tilted her head, her crimson eyes glinting faintly in the starlight. Humans always have such simple answers to complex questions, and Krezeth always overcomplicate the simple ones, he countered with a faint smile. Thalvera huffed a soft laugh, though there was no real venom in it. They stood in silence for a while, the vastness of space wrapping around them like a shroud. It was a rare moment of calm in a sea of chaos, and Elias found himself stealing glances at her profile, the sharp angles of her features, the way her scales caught the light, the slight furrow in her brow that betrayed her ever-turning mind. "You didn't have to speak up for me at the council," she said eventually, breaking the silence. "But you did. You didn't have to stand with me against your father," he replied. "But you did." Her lips curved into a wry smile. "Perhaps we're more alike than we care to admit." Elias leaned against the railing, crossing his arms. "I've been thinking that for a while now." She turned to face him fully, her expression unreadable. "Have you? And what else have you been thinking, Commander?" There was a challenge in her tone, but it was undercut by something softer. Curiosity, perhaps, or vulnerability. Elias held her gaze, feeling the weight of her question and the tension that had been building between them for weeks. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "that you're not as impossible as you like to pretend." Her eyes narrowed, though there was no real anger there. "And you're not as insufferable as I thought." They were close now, closer than they'd ever been. The distance that had once defined their interactions, the walls of mistrust, pride, and duty, felt thinner than ever, as though one step forward would shatter them completely. "Thalvera," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Elias," she interrupted, her tone softer than he'd ever heard it. "You talk too much." Before he could respond, she closed the distance between them, her sharp features softening as she leaned in. Her touch was firm yet careful, her hand resting briefly on his chest before she pulled back just enough to search his face for any sign of hesitation. Elias's heart raced, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he mirrored her gesture, his fingers brushing against the smooth scales of her arm. "Is this another one of your tactics?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Her lips curved into a faint smirk. "Do you always need to analyze everything?" "Occupational hazard," he muttered, before closing the distance between them entirely. Their kiss was tentative at first, a careful meeting of two worlds that had spent so long in opposition. But as the moment stretched, it deepened, carrying with it the weight of all they had endured and all they had yet to face. When they finally parted, the tension between them had shifted into something entirely different. "I didn't see that coming," Elias admitted, his voice tinged with both surprise and amusement. Thalvera tilted her head, her smirk returning. "Then you weren't paying attention." The The days that followed were marked by a newfound closeness between them, though they were careful to keep it from prying eyes. Their interactions, once sharp and combative, were now laced with subtle warmth. They worked together seamlessly, their bond an unspoken anchor amidst the storm of politics and war. But their connection did not go unnoticed. Mira Solis, ever perceptive, caught on quickly. One evening, as Elias reviewed tactical reports in his quarters, she stopped by, leaning casually against the doorway. "So," she said with a knowing grin. "You and the princess, huh?" Elias didn't look up from his reports. "You're imagining things, Lieutenant." "Sure I am," she said, her grin widening. "Just be careful. You've got enough people gunning for you, without adding interspecies romance to the mix." Elias finally looked up, his expression serious.
"Noted."
"Thanks, Mira." As she left, he leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. Mira was right. Their relationship, whatever it was, would complicate an already precarious situation. Yet, as his thoughts drifted back to Thalvera, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. Meanwhile, Thalvera faced scrutiny from her own people. Rumors of her closeness to Elias began to circulate, fueled by spies within the station. She confronted her father during a secure holocall, his crimson eyes narrowing as he addressed her. "You walk a dangerous path, daughter," Zorthakare said, his voice heavy with warning. "Your choices could cost you everything." "I've already lost everything," she replied, her tone defiant. "What I do now, I do because I believe in it. And this human? Does he fall into that category as well?" Her silence spoke volumes, and Zorthakare's expression softened, if only slightly. "Be careful, Thalvera. You tread on fragile ground." As the Alliance faced new threats and challenges, the bond between Thalvera and Elias became both their greatest strength and their most dangerous vulnerability. Together, they would fight for the fragile peace they had built, but they both knew that love, like war, demanded sacrifice. In the weeks that followed, the delicate balance between Elias and Thalvera's personal relationship and their responsibilities was tested at every turn. Rumors of their connection spread, inflaming tensions within the Alliance. Detractors on both sides began questioning their loyalties, claiming their bond was a liability that would fracture what little trust remained between humans and the Krezeth. But it was not politics that brought the Alliance to its breaking point. It was the rogue Krezeth faction. The attack came without warning. A fleet of rebel Krezeth warships emerged from hyperspace and struck at the orbital station where the joint starship was under construction. Their goal was clear: destroy the vessel and shatter the fragile alliance before it could solidify. Elias and Thalvera were in the midst of a meeting when the alarms blared. The station shuddered under the impact of enemy fire, and chaos erupted as officers scrambled to their stations. Thalvera stood, her expression fierce. "They mean to destroy everything we've built." "Not if we stop them," Elias said, already moving. "Get to the command deck. I'll organize the defense teams." "Elias," she called, stopping him in his tracks. Her crimson eyes locked with his, unspoken words passing between them. "Be careful." "You too," he replied before disappearing into the fray. The battle was fierce. The rogue Krezeth forces were relentless, their ships wielding devastating firepower. But the station's defenses, bolstered by human ingenuity and Krezeth technology, held firm. Elias coordinated the station's defense with precision, his calm commands rallying the beleaguered crews. Meanwhile, Thalvera took command of the station's Krezeth contingent. Her knowledge of rebel tactics proved invaluable, allowing her to anticipate their movements and exploit their weaknesses. But as the battle raged on, it became clear that the rebels' true target was not the station itself. It was her. A rebel boarding party infiltrated the station, cutting their way toward the command deck. Their leader, a fierce Krezeth warlord named Karad, had once been one of her father's most trusted generals before defecting. Now, he sought to eliminate her and claim victory for the rogue cause. Thalvera stood her ground as Karad and his forces breached the command deck. "Karad," she said, her voice cold. "I should have known you were behind this." The warlord sneered. You've betrayed your blood, princess. The Empire will rise again. Without you. Thalvera drew her weapon, her stance unyielding. You'll find I'm not so easily cast aside. The ensuing battle was brutal. Thalvera fought with the precision of a warrior born, her blade a blur as she defended herself and the crew under her command. But the odds were against her. Just as Karad closed in for the killing blow, a gunshot rang out, and the warlord staggered, a wound smoking in his side. Elias stepped into the fray, his sidearm raised. You picked the wrong fight. Together, Elias and Thalvera fought side by side, their movements perfectly synchronized. Their bond, forged in the fires of war and diplomacy, gave them an edge even against overwhelming odds. Finally, Karad fell, and the remaining rebels retreated, their assault broken. In the aftermath of the battle, the station's crew worked tirelessly to repair the damage. The joint starship had survived, though it bore scars from the attack. Elias and Thalvera stood together in the observation dome, the quiet of the stars a stark contrast to the chaos they had just endured. We did it, Elias said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Thalvera nodded, her gaze fixed on the battered ship.
For now.
But they'll come again. And others will follow. He turned to her, his expression resolute. Then we'll face them. Together. She met his gaze, her usual sharpness tempered by something softer. You say that as if it's so simple.
Because it is, he said.
We've come this far. I'm not giving up now. For a moment, she said nothing, her crimson eyes searching his. Then, she placed a hand on his arm, a rare gesture of vulnerability. Neither am I. The victory over the rebels became a turning point. News of the battle spread, and for the first time, humans and Krezeth began to see the alliance as more than just a fragile truce. It was a partnership forged in blood and fire, one that could stand against even the greatest of threats. As the joint starship prepared for its maiden voyage, Elias and Thalvera found themselves standing at the threshold of a new era. Their relationship, once a source of contention, had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that even the most unlikely of bonds could withstand the weight of a galaxy's expectations. The future remained uncertain, and the path ahead was fraught with danger. But as they stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next, they knew one thing for certain. Together, they were unstoppable.